Grizzly encounters push human survival to the limit, transforming peaceful wilderness excursions into sudden battles for life. These brutal, lightning-fast attacks leave lasting scars, both physical and psychological. Across North America's most remote regions, people have faced these apex predators in split-second moments, where courage and quick thinking made the difference between life and death. Today, we'll explore 6 terrifying true stories of bear confrontations, from a photographer's desperate fight in Alaskan backcountry to a camper's midnight nightmare in Georgia's forests. Each survivor's account reveals the raw power of nature and the lessons learned when humans cross paths with these predators. Stick around as we relive their harrowing ordeals. In the summer of 1997, a remote wilderness region in south-central Alaska, referred to by some as the Wolverine Valley, had grown in popularity among experienced hikers seeking untouched natural beauty. This rugged landscape, dominated by dense spruce forests and winding creek beds, had long supported one of the continent's largest grizzly bear populations. Isolated from urban centers and accessible only by bush plane or a demanding 3-day trek, the area presented frequent wildlife encounters, though serious incidents were rare when proper precautions were observed. Sarah Miller, a 34-year-old outdoor photographer from Portland, arrived at the primary trailhead on a crisp August morning. Having spent years documenting wildlife across the Pacific Northwest, this expedition marked the culmination of a long-term project she had meticulously planned. Her goal was to capture photographs of the massive coastal grizzlies known to frequent the salmon streams during late summer feeding season. The day began promisingly. After hiking roughly 4 miles along an established trail, Sarah veered off toward a nearby creek, where she had noticed fresh bear signs the day before. Her camera gear was secured in a bear-resistant container, and she carried regulation bear spray, relying on her extensive experience in wilderness photography to guide her actions. Around 2:30 p.m., while crouched near a fallen log to photograph scattered salmon remains along the creek bank, she became aware of an ominous sound, heavy breathing, close and deliberate. Turning slowly, she came face to face with a massive grizzly bear, estimated to weigh at least 1,500 pounds and standing less than 20 feet away. The scars on its muzzle and its aggressive body language left little doubt. This was no casual encounter. The bear charged suddenly. Sarah deployed her bear spray, but wind conditions prevented the mist from reaching its target effectively. The bear struck her with devastating force, its claws raking across her back and shoulders, knocking her to the ground. The assault, though brief, likely lasting under 30 seconds, left Sarah severely injured. Her left arm was badly mauled, and she drifted in and out of consciousness as the bear abruptly retreated into the forest. Despite intense pain and disorientation, Sarah managed to activate her emergency radio beacon. Her distress signal was picked up by a wilderness ranger stationed at a remote post roughly 12 miles away. Jake Collins, a 10-year veteran of Alaska's backcountry operations, immediately recognized the urgency. He contacted regional support and readied his own rescue equipment. Jake reached the site within 2 hours, accompanied by Ranger trainee Marcus Hendricks. They discovered Sarah conscious, but suffering from serious lacerations, blood loss, and a suspected concussion. After stabilizing her and coordinating a medical evacuation, Jake made the difficult choice to begin tracking the aggressive bear while awaiting reinforcements. Tracking efforts revealed disturbing signs. The bear's path was erratic, and fresh claw marks on nearby trees suggested elevated aggression. Within the next few hours, 2 more hikers in a separate area of the valley reported an encounter with what appeared to be the same grizzly, prompting emergency alerts throughout the region. Efforts to contain the animal proved ineffective. Traps baited with salmon were set, but the bear avoided them entirely. Tracking dogs brought in from a nearby urban center repeatedly lost the trail as the bear moved through dense terrain with apparent familiarity. Even more concerning, the bear seemed to be actively seeking out human presence rather than avoiding it. and unusual and dangerous behavior. By the third day, Sarah had been evacuated to a regional hospital for surgery and recovery, but the situation in the valley had grown critical. The grizzly had approached 2 separate camping groups, prompting full evacuations and the closure of all trails. Wildlife authorities determined that ground-based containment was no longer a safe or viable strategy. Helicopter support was authorized through a state-level wildlife agency. A pilot and a wildlife veterinarian arrived with specialized tranquilizer equipment designed for large predators. The aerial search began at dawn on the 4th day, with crews scanning the rugged terrain from above. After nearly 6 hours, they located the bear in a narrow canyon. From the helicopter, the veterinarian observed that the animal was favoring its right rear leg and limping. As the team maneuvered to line up a tranquilizer shot, they noticed the likely cause of its condition. A large metal object, possibly from an old hunting trap, was embedded in the bear's hindquarters. The wound was severely infected, likely causing intense pain and explaining the bear's erratic and aggressive behavior. A tranquilizer dart was successfully administered from the air, and the bear went down within minutes. Ground teams moved in cautiously to assess the condition. Faced with a difficult ethical decision, the rangers weighed the possibility of relocating the bear against the severity of its injuries. After consultation with wildlife specialists, it was determined that the animal could undergo surgery to remove the embedded object and receive treatment for the infection. The bear was transported to a wildlife rehabilitation center in interior Alaska. Nicknamed Wolverine by staff, the bear responded well to treatment. After 3 months of recovery, including physical rehabilitation and behavioral monitoring, he was released back into the wild in a remote location far from human recreation zones. Sarah also made a full physical recovery, though she was left with lasting scars. She eventually resumed her photography work, but chose never to travel alone in grizzly territory again. The incident prompted a review and overhaul of emergency protocols for remote wilderness areas in the state. Officials also initiated new efforts to locate and remove abandoned hunting equipment from known bear habitats. The case drew attention to the unforeseen consequences of human intrusion into wild ecosystems and the responsibility to mitigate dangers left behind. Jake Collins received official recognition for his calm, decisive actions throughout the crisis. He later remarked that without aerial support, the outcome could have been far worse. The use of helicopter tracking and tranquilization proved critical in safely resolving an encounter that could easily have ended in further tragedy for both people and wildlife. In the autumn of 2003, a mountainous region in northern Georgia, part of a remote forest wilderness, experienced an unusually dry season that drove wildlife closer to human activity in search of food and water. This expansive area, marked by dense hardwood canopies and steep ravines, had long been a favorite of solo campers and hikers seeking solitude away from crowded recreation zones. The local black bear population, typically numbering around 300 individuals, had begun exhibiting unusually bold foraging behaviors due to the lack of natural food sources. Marcus Bell, a 41-year-old insurance adjuster from Atlanta, had selected this isolated camping area as a place to reflect after a recent divorce. Following 23 years of marriage, he sought time alone to reevaluate his life direction. While not particularly experienced in backcountry travel, Marcus believed that a long weekend immersed in nature would offer the clarity he needed. His chosen destination was a secluded clearing near a quiet stream, accessible only by a narrow hiking trail that naturally discouraged casual visitors. He arrived at the site on a Friday afternoon and spent the remainder of the day setting up camp and familiarizing himself with the surrounding environment. Having researched bear safety guidelines beforehand, he carefully suspended his food supply in a bear-resistant container approximately 12 feet above the ground. His camp was well organized, with his sleeping area located at a safe distance from his cooking and food storage zones in accordance with standard wilderness practices. The first night passed without incident. Marcus slept peacefully in his four-season tent, comforted by the soothing sound of the nearby creek and the absence of urban distractions. Saturday brought a day of calm and reflection. He explored the trails, noticed deer tracks and bird calls, and spent the late afternoon journaling. He saw no signs of predatory wildlife and felt his anxiety easing as the hours passed. Around 3 a.m. on Sunday morning, that tranquility shattered. Marcus was jolted awake by a violent impact against the side of his tent. Before he could fully register the noise, the tent wall collapsed inward as a large black bear, estimated to weigh roughly 250 pounds, lunged into his sleeping area. The animal had apparently been drawn to the campsite by the scent of personal hygiene items Marcus had mistakenly left in his backpack inside the tent. The bear clamped its jaws around Marcus's left forearm and began dragging him toward the tent opening. Overwhelmed by pain and terror, he struggled to resist as the animal thrashed its head side to side, attempting to subdue what it perceived as a threat to its foraging. In a desperate attempt to defend himself, Marcus reached for a small folding knife in his pocket. With his free hand, he began stabbing at the bear's head and neck in erratic, panicked motions. The strikes connected multiple times, finally causing the bear to release its grip. With the sudden reprieve, Marcus rolled free of the animal's grasp. The bear remained momentarily within the collapsed structure, growling and seemingly preparing for another charge. However, Marcus's continued screaming, combined with the injuries inflicted by the knife, appeared to dissuade the animal from continuing its attack. After a tense pause, the bear backed out of the tent and disappeared into the surrounding darkness. Marcus was left bleeding heavily in the wreckage of his campsite, his forearm badly mangled and multiple wounds oozing blood. Lacking the ability to apply proper first aid, he quickly realized that his survival would depend on reaching help. His cell phone, like many in such remote areas, had no signal. His vehicle was parked nearly 3 miles away at the trailhead. Despite his injuries and growing fatigue, Marcus managed to gather a few essential supplies and began the arduous journey back to his car. He used his flashlight sparingly to conserve battery power and relied on memory to follow the narrow trail through the woods. The trek, which had taken him just over 90 minutes in daylight, stretched into a 4-hour ordeal in the pre-dawn darkness. He frequently stopped to rest and wrap his wounds as best he could with makeshift bandages. At approximately 7:30 a.m., he encountered a group of early morning hikers who immediately recognized the severity of his injuries. They administered basic first aid and contacted emergency responders while helping escort him to the parking lot. Paramedics arrived soon after and transported Marcus to a regional medical center, where he underwent emergency surgery to repair torn tendons and prevent infection caused by the bear's bite. During the subsequent investigation, wildlife officials confirmed that the same black bear had been reported at 3 other campsites in the preceding week. Although Marcus had properly secured his food, the bear had been drawn to scented toiletries and wet wipes he had inadvertently stored in his personal pack inside the tent, a critical mistake that nearly proved fatal. Marcus made a full physical recovery following 6 weeks of rehabilitation and physical therapy. However, the psychological impact endured much longer. He developed a persistent anxiety about outdoor activities and never again returned to solo camping. The prominent scars on his forearm remained as lasting reminders of the encounter, though, in time, Marcus came to view them less as marks of trauma and more as emblems of survival. The camping area was temporarily closed to the public, and the bear responsible for the incident was safely trapped and relocated to a remote section of forest far from human activity. Wildlife authorities reinforced education campaigns to emphasize the importance of securing all scented items, not just food, when camping in bear country. The incident also served as a sobering reminder that even minor oversights in wilderness environments can have life-threatening consequences. In the spring of 1989, a remote wilderness region on an island off the coast of Alaska remained one of North America's most rugged and dangerous hunting destinations. Spanning nearly 3,600 square miles of mountainous terrain and dense alder thickets, the area was home to one of the world's largest populations of coastal brown bears, some individuals weighing more than 1,400 pounds. Its isolation, accessible only by charter aircraft or boat, attracted only the most experienced hunters, while discouraging those unprepared for its harsh and unforgiving conditions. Caleb Rourke, a 38-year-old construction foreman from Wyoming, had spent 3 years planning his expedition into this wilderness. Known among his peers for his successful big game hunts across the Rocky Mountain region, he brought with him a reputation for patience, precision, and calculated risk. Joining him was his cousin, Jake Rourke, a 29-year-old rancher. Though Jake possessed strong wilderness survival skills, his experience with dangerous game was limited. Still, he welcomed the chance for adventure and time with family. Their target was a legendary brown bear that local guides had dubbed the River Ghost, an enormous elusive boar known for both its size and its uncanny ability to avoid hunters. The animal had become a near mythical figure in the region, with numerous reported sightings but no confirmed harvest. For Caleb, the hunt represented a career-defining opportunity. For Jake, it was more about the experience and camaraderie than the trophy. The two men chartered a bush plane from the island's only town and were flown into a remote valley renowned for its salmon runs and dense bear traffic. The pilot, well-versed in backcountry drop-offs, provided safety briefings and marked pickup coordinates before leaving them behind. Caleb and Jake established their base camp roughly 2 miles from the landing zone, setting up near known bear travel routes to increase their chances of spotting game. Over the next 4 days, they tracked multiple bears through thick vegetation and challenging terrain. Rain and fog hampered visibility, while the terrain made scent control difficult. Despite the setbacks, they remained focused. On the 5th evening, their persistence was rewarded. Just before dusk, they spotted a massive boar moving cautiously through alder growth along the river's edge. Caleb moved into position for a clean shot, his rifle steady. Jake remained approximately 30 yards behind, concealed behind a fallen log that offered both protection and a clear line of sight. Caleb fired at what appeared to be a vital area, but something went wrong. The bullet failed to drop the bear, likely deflected by thick brush or misjudged range. Instantly, the animal zeroed in on the source of the threat and charged toward Caleb's position with astonishing speed. As Caleb attempted to chamber a second round, his rifle jammed. In the seconds that followed, he struggled to free the bolt mechanism, but the bear was already upon him. It struck with overwhelming force, sending Caleb sprawling onto the rocky riverbank. The bear began to maul him in a frenzy of claws and teeth. From his hidden vantage point, Jake could only watch as the bear attacked. He saw the animal bite into Caleb's back and drag his cousin toward the thickets. The bear's behavior went beyond territorial defense. It was treating Caleb as prey. What followed was even more chilling. The bear partially buried Caleb's body under moss and debris, a caching behavior typically used to store food for later. Throughout this, the bear remained completely unaware of Jake's presence. Knowing that any attempt to intervene would be suicidal, Jake stayed still and silent, paralyzed by shock and helplessness. Only after the bear had vanished into the underbrush did he dare to move. He waited nearly 2 hours before cautiously approaching the scene. Caleb's rifle was still on the ground, the bolt locked tight. Jake confirmed that his cousin was beyond help. With no time to waste, he turned and began the difficult hike back to base camp to retrieve their emergency radio. It was the only way to signal for rescue, and the trek would test his endurance and resolve. Due to severe weather conditions, it took rescue crews 2 full days to reach the site. When they arrived, they located Caleb's partially cached remains near the riverbank, just as Jake had described. Despite an intensive search, the massive bear responsible for the attack was never located. It was presumed to have retreated deeper into the wilderness, beyond the reach of search efforts. The tragedy underscored the risks of hunting apex predators in remote regions. Jake's detailed account proved crucial for wildlife officials as they investigated the event. He struggled with survivors' guilt in the months and years that followed. The experience left a lasting impact, not only due to the trauma, but because of the helplessness he had felt during the attack. In response to the fatal encounter, authorities temporarily closed hunting access to the area and reviewed safety protocols for guided and self-led hunts. Jake, for his part, never returned to big game hunting. The loss of his cousin had irreversibly altered his connection to the wilderness. In time, he shifted his focus toward promoting hunter safety and education. Jake eventually founded a non-profit organization that specialized in training hunters to better prepare for encounters with large predators. He often spoke at seminars and conservation events, using the experience to educate others. The jammed rifle, cleaned and mounted but left unfixed, became a centerpiece in his presentations. It served as a powerful visual aid and a grim reminder that even experienced hunters are vulnerable when equipment fails in high-stakes situations. In the summer of 2011, a remote wilderness region in south-central Montana, referred to by researchers as the Bear Creek Mountains, became a critical site for studying elk migration patterns. This rugged expanse, known for its steep gulches and dense pine forests, represented one of the last relatively undisturbed ecosystems in the northern Rockies. Its isolation and unforgiving terrain made it ideal for scientific research, but also posed serious safety challenges, particularly for solo fieldwork conducted in prime grizzly bear territory. Derek Monroe, a 26-year-old graduate student in wildlife biology at a regional university, had received approval to conduct field research in this protected area as part of his master's thesis. His project focused on elk behavioral adaptations across varying elevation zones and seasonal ranges. The work demanded extensive hiking, navigation through remote terrain, and the ability to document evidence of elk activity over a 6-week field period during the height of summer. Derek was well prepared. He had completed wilderness safety training, including bear encounter protocols, and had significant backcountry experience. His research involved moving from site to site, establishing temporary camps in various drainage systems. His goal was to systematically survey specific watershed areas for elk sign, including tracks, droppings, bedding areas, and feeding activity. One of his primary target zones was a narrow gulch locally known as Devil's Canyon, an area with a long history of elk activity due to its funnel-like structure. On July 18th, Derek began his morning survey in the canyon just after sunrise. Early morning hours typically coincided with peak elk movement, and the steep walls of the canyon, rising more than 200 feet on either side, created a natural corridor for wildlife. The same features that made the canyon excellent for observing elk also created potential danger by limiting visibility and escape options in the event of a bear encounter. At approximately 10:30 a.m., as Derek navigated a tight bend along the canyon floor, he came face to face with a grizzly bear sow and her cub. The sow, estimated to weigh around 400 pounds, responded immediately with defensive aggression, a typical reaction when a cub is perceived to be threatened. The distance between Derek and the bear was dangerously short. He had no time to deploy his bear spray before the attack began. The sow charged, covering the ground between them in just seconds. Her initial strike hit Derek across the left side of his face, tearing deep lacerations from his temple to his jaw and partially severing his ear. The force of the blow knocked him off balance and onto the ground, but the bear continued her attack. Drawing on his training, Derek dropped into a protective position, curling on his side, hands over his neck, backpack toward the bear. Despite this, the sow delivered another powerful blow to his ribcage, fracturing 2 ribs and collapsing his left lung. Her claws tore into his backpack, ripping open compartments and scattering his research equipment across the rocky canyon floor. The most serious injury came when the bear bit down on Derek's right thigh, crushing muscle tissue and narrowly missing the femoral artery. He remained motionless, knowing that any sudden movement or noise could trigger further aggression. His ability to stay still and silent may have saved his life. After delivering the final bite, the sow paused over Derek's body. She huffed, sniffed the air, and tested her surroundings, possibly scanning for further threats to her cub. Derek later recalled faint sounds coming from the nearby brush, likely vocalizations from the cub, which reaffirmed that the mother's aggression had been entirely defensive. Eventually, the bears retreated into the canyon brush, leaving Derek severely injured and alone in one of the most remote and inaccessible parts of the region. For nearly an hour, he remained motionless, unsure whether the bears might return. Once certain they had gone, he began assessing his condition. The situation was dire. His injuries were extensive, and he had no means of calling for help from his current location. The nearest ranger station was over 3 miles away, and the terrain between was unforgiving. Still, he knew immediate evacuation was critical. He tore strips from his clothing to make makeshift bandages and fashioned a walking aid from the aluminum frame of his damaged pack. Despite his pain and blood loss, Derek began the slow and painful journey out of the canyon. The 3-mile hike stretched into a 4-hour ordeal. He stopped often to rest and resecure his improvised bandages, all while managing symptoms of shock and breathing difficulty from the collapsed lung. Around 3 p.m., he reached a clearing near the Devil's Canyon Ranger Station. Ranger Patricia Hendricks, stationed there at the time, immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. She applied first aid, initiated an emergency evacuation, and coordinated a helicopter response to transport Derek to a regional medical facility. He was airlifted to a hospital in Billings, where he underwent emergency surgery to repair facial injuries and stabilize internal damage. His thigh wounds required intensive treatment, and the partially severed ear underwent reconstructive procedures. Derek's physical recovery took 3 months and involved extensive physical therapy. Wildlife officials later reviewed the attack and concluded that Derek had followed all proper safety protocols. The encounter had been a case of unfortunate timing and proximity, conditions that can override even the most cautious planning in grizzly habitat, especially during cub rearing season. The area was temporarily closed to all research activities, while officials reviewed safety guidelines for field studies. Derek eventually resumed his thesis, but with modifications to his methodology. He eliminated solo excursions into high-risk zones and began working exclusively in teams with support measures in place. He continued his career in wildlife biology, but never returned to solitary fieldwork in grizzly country. His later work emphasized collaborative research and the development of improved safety standards for remote field studies. His experience became a case study in academic and conservation circles, cited for both the dangers inherent in solo wildlife research and the critical importance of post-encounter survival training. In the winter of 2006, a remote archipelago located between mainland Norway and the North Pole had become an increasingly popular destination for affluent eco-tourists seeking authentic Arctic experiences. The region's harsh climate and abundant polar bear population created unique opportunities for wildlife observation while requiring sophisticated safety infrastructure to protect visitors. One luxury facility, a high-end Arctic lodge, marketed itself as offering untouched wilderness with 5-star comfort and safety. The lodge's reputation was built on its comprehensive safety systems, including perimeter electric fencing, motion sensors, and emergency communication equipment designed to prevent dangerous wildlife encounters. Located on the coast of a remote Arctic bay, the facility accommodated a small number of guests in heated cabins and provided guided excursions and professional wildlife photography opportunities under strict safety protocols. On February 14th, an unusually severe blizzard struck the region with winds exceeding 80 miles per hour and temperatures dropping to -45 degrees Fahrenheit. The storm system had developed rapidly over nearby Arctic waters, catching forecasters off guard with its intensity and duration. Local meteorologists had predicted moderate snowfall, but actual conditions resembled a Category 3 hurricane combined with Arctic temperatures. The extreme weather overwhelmed the lodge's primary generator, a diesel-powered system designed to withstand normal Arctic conditions, but inadequate for such an intense storm. Ice accumulation on fuel lines and electrical components caused cascading failures throughout the facility's infrastructure. The complete power failure disabled the electric perimeter fencing and interior heating systems, leaving guests and staff vulnerable to both hypothermia and potential wildlife encounters. Emergency backup power was limited to essential lighting and communication systems, creating a dangerous situation where standard safety protocols became ineffective. Nina Hallberg, the lodge's 33-year-old head chef from a coastal Norwegian city, was working the overnight shift preparing breakfast when the power failed. She had been employed at the facility for 2 seasons and was experienced in Arctic survival protocols, including procedures for deterring polar bear encounters. Her prior experience included work at research stations in Greenland and certification in wilderness first aid for Arctic environments. The kitchen area, located in the rear section of the lodge, contained emergency supplies including flares, deterrent sprays, and communication equipment. Nina had been preparing traditional breakfast items for the guests scheduled to depart later that morning. Weather permitting, the kitchen's design, with multiple exit points and strategically positioned safety gear, reflected the facility's commitment to operating in an extreme environment. When the power went out, Nina maintained composure and immediately implemented the emergency protocol she had practiced numerous times during safety drills. She secured food items, activated battery-powered lights, and monitored radio communications for updates on rescue efforts and changing weather conditions. At approximately 4:12 a.m., a mature male polar bear, estimated at 800 pounds but visibly emaciated from prolonged hunting failures, approached the lodge complex, following scent trails from food preparations that had accumulated near the kitchen. The bear's physical condition, including visible rib outlines and old scars from territorial fights, indicated it had not fed successfully for an extended period. The animal's sense of smell led it directly to the kitchen's exterior door, where food odors were strongest. It began inspecting the door frame, sniffing and pawing at the surface to test its strength. When the initial probes revealed weaknesses, the bear escalated its efforts, striking the frame repeatedly. The wooden door, compromised by months of exposure to Arctic conditions, began to splinter under the force of the bear's blows. Nina heard the impact from her position inside the kitchen and immediately recognized the danger. She gathered emergency supplies, including a marine-grade distress flare from the safety kit. The final strike from the bear shattered the door's locking mechanism, swinging the heavy wooden panel inward. The bear's massive head appeared in the doorway as it investigated the interior, drawn by the concentrated food aromas lingering in the air. Nina moved toward the rear exit and activated the flare, creating a burst of light and chemical heat. Upon noticing her movement, the bear entered the kitchen with the focused drive of a starving predator. Although initially startled by the light and noise from the flare, the bear resumed its approach. As Nina moved to reach the rear exit, the animal lunged and struck her across the back and shoulder, inflicting deep lacerations that penetrated her insulated clothing. The impact knocked her to the floor, where the bear pinned her against the wall. Despite the pain, Nina forced the burning flare into the bear's face. The intense heat and chemical reaction caused temporary blindness and extreme discomfort, prompting the animal to retreat toward the broken entrance. Disoriented and in pain, the bear withdrew slightly, giving Nina enough time to crawl toward the adjacent generator shed. She reached the reinforced door and secured it just as the bear began recovering. The generator shed, built to a much higher structural standard, provided sufficient protection. From within, Nina used the emergency radio to call for help. The bear remained outside the damaged kitchen for nearly 2 hours before finally wandering off during the still raging blizzard. Rescue teams arrived 6 hours later when conditions allowed for helicopter travel. The crew included Arctic medics and wildlife experts who assessed the damage to the facility and provided immediate care for Nina. She was transported to a regional hospital for treatment of multiple lacerations and to prevent infection. Her injuries required surgical intervention and 3 weeks of hospitalization, though she avoided permanent disability. Experts credited her quick thinking and use of the flare with saving her life. Encounters between humans and polar bears in such situations often result in fatalities if the person is unable to escape or mount a sufficient defense. In this case, the bear's injuries caused enough confusion to disrupt the attack. An investigation into the incident uncovered multiple vulnerabilities in the lodge's safety systems beyond the power outage. The door to the kitchen had not been reinforced to withstand wildlife pressure, and emergency protocols did not adequately address scenarios involving simultaneous weather and infrastructure failure. Insurance providers later concluded that the facility's risk management plans were insufficient for the region's rapidly changing climate conditions. The facility was permanently closed in the months following the incident, with investors facing significant financial losses. Legal disputes over staff compensation and guest refunds continued for several months, and the incident became a cautionary case study in Arctic tourism planning. Nina did not return to work in Arctic environments after recovering. Instead, she opened a restaurant in her hometown, applying her culinary skills in a considerably safer setting. The restaurant, named after the Aurora Borealis, attracted visitors interested in traditional cuisine. Occasionally, Nina shared her story with customers who asked about the visible scars on her shoulder, using her experience to highlight the realities of working in remote, wildlife-dense environments. The polar bear was later found dead roughly 20 miles from the lodge, having succumbed to starvation and injuries from the flare. Wildlife experts who examined the body confirmed that the bear's deteriorating condition explained its desperate behavior. Its death underscored the increasing pressures faced by Arctic predators as shrinking sea ice and changing ecosystems disrupt traditional hunting behaviors, pushing animals into more frequent contact with human developments. In the autumn of 1994, the mountainous wilderness region of western Alberta, known locally as the Bow River Valley, experienced an early snowfall that drove wildlife to lower elevations in search of accessible food sources. This pristine area, characterized by dense pine forests and rushing mountain streams, attracted thousands of visitors annually, but also supported one of Canada's most stable populations of large carnivores. The combination of abundant natural resources and rugged terrain created ideal conditions for both recreational activities and dangerous wildlife encounters. Emily Voss, a 29-year-old elementary school teacher from Calgary, had planned a weekend camping trip with her fiancé, Tyler Bramstead, to celebrate their recent engagement. Both were experienced hikers who had explored numerous trails throughout Alberta's mountain regions. Though neither possessed advanced wilderness survival training or carried defensive equipment beyond basic first aid supplies. Emily, who taught 4th grade at a local elementary school, was known for her enthusiasm for outdoor education and often incorporated nature studies into her classroom lessons. Tyler, a 32-year-old mechanical engineer, shared Emily's passion for wilderness exploration. He had proposed to her during a hiking trip 2 months earlier. Their relationship had grown through shared outdoor experiences, and they frequently spent weekends in the mountains. Both considered themselves competent hikers who understood the basics of wilderness safety, although they had never encountered dangerous wildlife during their previous trips. They established their campsite on a Friday evening at a designated area beside Clearwater Creek, approximately 8 miles from the nearest road access. The location offered scenic mountain views and convenient access to several established trails, making it a popular choice for weekend visitors seeking moderate outdoor challenges. Their campsite followed bear safety recommendations, with food stored in proper containers and cooking areas positioned well away from their tent. Saturday morning brought clear skies and ideal hiking conditions. The crisp air and excellent visibility encouraged them to explore. They decided to venture along an unofficial trail that local hikers had mentioned, which led to a secluded waterfall about 2 miles upstream from their campsite. The unmarked path required them to leave the main trail and navigate through denser forest, a decision that would prove fatal. They had been hiking for approximately 90 minutes when the sound of rushing water indicated that they were nearing their destination. The terrain grew more challenging as they moved through thick undergrowth and fallen timber, requiring careful attention to footing and navigation. At approximately 10:30 a.m. on their second day, the couple was walking through dense vegetation when Emily noticed what she initially believed was a large boulder near the creek bank. Tyler was observing rock formations when Emily realized the boulder was actually a large bear, partially obscured by vegetation, feeding on a carcass. The bear, a mature female estimated to weigh about 450 pounds, was startled by the sudden appearance of humans and perceived their presence as a threat to her food cache. Large carnivores are known to be particularly aggressive when defending food sources during autumn, as they prepare for winter hibernation. The bear reacted immediately, charging across the short distance between herself and the couple. Emily, who had already turned toward the animal and was less than 15 feet away, had no opportunity to retreat or implement any defensive action. The attack was swift and overwhelming. The animal tackled Emily with considerable force. The impact drove her to the ground, and the bear's weight pinned her against the forest floor. With powerful jaws and claws, the bear inflicted devastating injuries to her neck and shoulder area, causing fatal trauma within moments. Tyler attempted to intervene by throwing nearby objects and making loud noises, but the bear showed no reaction to his efforts. The bear began dragging Emily's body into nearby brush, a behavior consistent with protecting a food cache from perceived threats. Tyler followed at a cautious distance, continuing to make noise in the hope of distracting the animal, but the bear remained focused on securing the area around the carcass. Investigators later concluded that Emily had likely died within seconds of the initial attack, as Tyler did not recall hearing her cry out. The entire incident lasted less than 2 minutes, from the moment of visual contact until the bear disappeared into the vegetation with her body, leaving Tyler alone and unharmed, but in deep shock. After activating his emergency beacon and hiking back toward the main trail, Tyler was met by a rescue team approximately 4 hours later. The response included experienced search and rescue personnel, as well as wildlife officers trained in handling wildlife attack scenes. Emily's remains were found in the brush near the feeding site, confirming the fatal nature of her injuries and the speed of the attack. Recovery operations required extreme caution. The bear remained in the immediate area, continuing to guard the partially consumed carcass. Wildlife officers used noise deterrents and spray to drive the bear away long enough for the recovery team to approach. Evidence at the scene indicated typical feeding and cache defense behavior. Further investigation revealed that the couple had inadvertently approached an active feeding site. The bear had likely killed the prey several days earlier and had established a temporary territory around it. The thick undergrowth and downwind approach prevented the animal from detecting the couple until they were dangerously close. Officials determined that the bear had responded in a predictable defensive manner rather than exhibiting abnormal aggression. However, because the animal remained close to a heavily visited area and had defended the carcass near human activity zones, wildlife authorities decided to relocate it to a more remote region. The operation involved tranquilizing the animal and transporting it over 200 miles into less accessible wilderness. Following the incident, Tyler underwent extensive psychological counseling to cope with the traumatic experience. He later relocated to Ontario, where he collaborated with wilderness safety groups to develop better education programs for outdoor recreation. His experience helped shape public awareness initiatives and improve safety messaging for hikers. The trail where the incident occurred was permanently closed. Officials installed additional signage warning of wildlife hazards and began requiring mandatory safety briefings for all backcountry permits issued in the area. Trail marking systems were also improved to discourage off-route exploration. The incident became a case study in wildlife management and outdoor safety courses, highlighting how even knowledgeable hikers can face unavoidable dangers in unpredictable environments. Emily's death underscored the importance of remaining on marked trails and understanding the seasonal behaviors of large carnivores. In her memory, Emily's family created a wilderness safety education fund. The initiative supports the distribution of safety equipment and school-based programs aimed at preventing future incidents. Her legacy continues through efforts to make outdoor exploration safer for others while honoring her commitment to education and nature.